Dr. Julian Bleecker is a designer, engineer, author, and successful entrepreneur. He received a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Cornell, a master's in human-computer interaction for the University of Washington, and a PhD in history of consciousness with an emphasis on technology and culture from the University of California, Santa Cruz. In his dissertation, Dr. Bleecker describes, quote, the reality effect, the process by which a specific, I'm going to insert cultural artifact, such as virtual reality, attains a sense of tangible, social, political, and cultural reality that is contingent on other social agents' engagement with that artifact. He held a professorship in the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts, where he taught physical computing, design technology, and mobile experiences. His research centered on the relationships among art, design, and technology as a form of research and development. He followed his professorship with a position as senior creative technologist and advanced designer at Nokia. He is best known, perhaps, though, as the originator of the concept of design fiction, which is like science or speculative fiction, but with tangible designs and products rather than prose. He is the founder of the Near Future Laboratory, a design and research studio that explores the intersection of emerging technologies, design and culture, a design fiction design studio, if you will. So please give a hand to Dr. Julian Bleecker.
Thank you. Humbling introduction. Thank you very much. I'm just going to do this. Wow, what a generative day. You guys did such an amazing job. Like I knew I wasn't going to be bored, but I didn't know that I'd be sending like 2 or 3 messages every talk to friends and colleagues who I thought, yeah, you should have been here. This is a great thing. So thank you guys, really amazing. Yeah, so I'm a doctor. Thank you for reminding me that. I don't know what to think about that. And I founded this place called the Near Future Laboratory. It started out as a blog when I was teaching at USC. And because it was called Near Future Laboratory, people kept calling up and saying like, hey, can we come by and visit? And I wouldn't tell them, I mean, no one knew what we were doing. It just sounded like kind of cool and interesting. And over the years, I just kind of leaned into that quite heavily. Just be like, there are these personas that have taken on this real meaning, even in the community now that exists 15 years after I created it. Someone said like, hey, can we start a channel to talk about a particular topic? And I'd write back, yeah, I think Augie cleared out a room in the sub-basement next to the mechanical room. Let's meet down there. And people live into this. And this idea of embodying a place and really playing into it in a way that elicits this kind of excitement and enthusiasm for the things that we're building is something that I've realized it's just me bringing my 5-year-old self into the present. And when I was that 5-year-old self, I knew I wanted to be an engineer. There was something about technology and creating stuff, and I was a Star Trek fan, all those kinds of things. It seemed obvious to me that I would do something that was about building worlds. Now, at the time, when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, you don't have that kind of language. You just have this feeling, this like, whoa, cool feeling when you see something that excites you and enthuses you. And if you live and grow up in a family where it's like you're kind of encouraged to have an active imagination and really play into that, this is going to end up happening. You're going to become a very confused adult. You're going to be a confused adult who doesn't know why that you want to do things where the imagination leads them to a place when someone's telling them, no, just sit there and do that. Here's your workstation, just get to work. Stop daydreaming. Stop doing all that weird creative stuff. We just need you to get that Figma document done. Or we need you to finish that CAD work. And you're always the peculiar one. There's a photo of me when I was a kid from Montessori school. We had class photo. And I'm the kid, and I love the photo, because I'm the kid in the 3rd row with Snoopy goggles on. And there's this one girl who's just looking back like incredulous. Like, how could you do that? We're here to take a formal class photo. And that 6 or 7-year-old self, that's the one who's living in this world today. Now, design fiction is my kind of adult, overeducated. Why do we spend so much time in school? Because we want to actually lean into that creative aspects of ourselves. We want to find the way to exercise our imagination by picking a topic instead of focusing on it. And we'd stay in school as long as we possibly could, I suspect. But I've wanted to find a way in which I could translate those feelings I had into something that was somehow practical, that had a name. And if I could call it something, well, hell, maybe I could get a job doing it. And so I kind of came up with this idea of design fiction in collaboration with a lot of people. It was around time when I was at USC, and I had the good fortune to have kind of paths cross with Bruce Sterling, who's a science fiction writer. And in that path crossing, he was a futurist at Art Center College of Design. We would be talking about stuff, and I'd say, what are you doing over there at Art Center, Bruce? I mean, you're a science fiction writer. He's like, I'm learning about design, in this Texas accent. I said, what? I mean, aren't you done learning? Like, you've already set, you're on a trajectory. Like, you've got film deals and stuff. Well, I just wanted to learn about design, something interesting about that kind of act. And I thought, wow, what is design when a science fiction writer does it? And so we talked about that. And we sort of came up with this idea that instead of writing about worlds, you'd actually create objects from those worlds. And I found this absolutely enthralling. As the engineer in me, the guy who wanted to make stuff, who wanted to solder things and build products and ideas, but I always wanted to do it from some other world, never satisfied with someone saying like, hey, we got this thing, we want to make the next version, but it needs to come in party colors. Could you do that for us? And it's like, no. So I didn't really do well at Nokia. And so I think about this act as a kind of archaeology. So imagine like what the archaeologist does, right? They dig into the past in order to find evidence of possible worlds, right? They come up, they find these artifacts, and there's no one around to talk to about it. I mean, it's just a thing that came out of the ground. And they need a puzzle over it. They need to think about what this thing is, and they're trying to elicit this story from this object, right? And the really amazing archaeologists, like they end up on PBS or some other show, because they're able to tell stories about these things that they found that's so compelling that it just draws us into that world. And I like to think of this image of this art. It's actually not an archaeologist, it's an actor. Looking at this thing, trying to divine its purpose. What did you do? Were you an instrument for combat? Were you an object that people use to tell a story about a future with? Are you a fragment of bone where you used to stir a cook pot? And they're doing this, that furrowed brow. It's almost like they're trying to get their neurons closer together somehow. Make some sense of this. Tell its story. What is it? Now we're talking about neuroscience ethics. And this is a neuroscience project, so brain reading device. It was created by this lab called Interlink. Research today for a better tomorrow. And this is the lead scientist there is Christopher Walken. So he's the main guy. His wife, ex-wife actually, Natalie Wood, was also involved. They have sort of a contentious relationship because they're no longer together, and there's a little bit of the kind of ethics of the work that they were doing that explains why Natalie and Christopher are no longer together. Cliff Robertson is like the CEO of this lab, and you can tell like he's like, man, money, 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 it's coming. I can tell. I love the acoustic coupled modem. Does anyone know what that is? I remember them. And the reason I tell you this story is because I think there's an aspect to this kind of work. So this is a science fiction film. It goes through the trajectory that we've all come to sort of understand and talk about without even really thinking about it. Great scientists who's just after the basic knowledge, the pure aspect of it, just wants to understand how the brain can be read for good purposes. And sort of lab experiments going on, pure. They're wearing the lab coats. They're in this kind of cluttered lab. The CEO looks at it, and the CEO's like, talks to the board, and the board's like, go right to the military. And then the military guy comes in, who in this film is like, sort of depicted as a slightly albino, sinister character. You don't know exactly what his background is, but certainly he was involved in something in Guatemala in 1978. You just don't know. And eventually, the film concludes with this image of just these helmets rolling off an assembly line, destined for military use. Right? That's a story that we know. Right? That's the arc that we end up talking about, and we wonder about, and we sort of want to pump the brakes on that, even in the conversations that we're having here. There's the basic science, and then there's a yeah, but, or have you also thought about? What about this? And those stories already exist. They pre-exist us, and we're born into them when we live through them. Yeah, so here's the film. And the the story to be kind of taken away from this is to consider that there are ethics that precede the work that we do, right? So this is the question that we're asking ourselves. Whose ethics should we concern ourselves with? And I would say even more than that, where do those ethics come from? So let me diverge for a minute with a little allegory from one of my favorite allegorical cartoons, Bugs Bunny. So this is an episode called Hairbrush. It's maybe 11 minutes long. And in this episode, Elmer J. Fudd represents the kind of questionable ethics of the world. So he's like, he's head of a very large mega corporation, and he wants to avoid being punished for his ethical malfeasance, right? So he convinces his board that he's gone crazy and he's actually a rabbit. And then he convinces Bugs Bunny to actually take his place, because if you take my place, I'll give you all the carrots you want forever, right? So that's the inducement, literally the carrot before the stick. And when Bugs is in the insane asylum, he's convinced to take this pill and he'll be made normal. And Bugs, being Bugs, is kind of like, all right, why not? And when Bugs takes the pill, of course, he goes through this kind of like fit of change, and he's asked to repeat over and over again, my name is Elmer J. Fudd, millionaire. I own a mansion and a yacht. And the doctor says again, my name's Elmer J. Fudd, millionaire. I own a mansion and a yacht. Again, my name is Elmer J. Fudd. It sort of fades out. And this story, he's convincing himself through this kind of pattern of repetition that he's living in this particular world, and he's actually Elmer J. Fudd, millionaire. He owns a mansion and a yacht. But he's the dupe, right? When we repeat these stories, we are the dupes. We're not thinking outside of the possibility of the worlds that we live in and the worlds that we would want to live in. Richard Powers is another interesting character in the context of telling stories about possible worlds and how those stories about those worlds bring us into them and get us to think about the consequences of what we're doing. So this is an amazing book that I read during the pandemic, not thinking that it would sort of shape my thinking about neuroscience, but it did. The story, to summarize without giving anything away, is centers around, for me as a reader, centers around an object, an fMRI device, that can not only interpret the patterns, but train your mind to kind of rewire itself by exhibiting those patterns back, just sort of enforcing the behavior. And the interesting thing here to point out is that Richard Powers, for a time, spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. Like that's where he was hanging out with, having dinners with investors and influential people of note, until his sort of consciousness got to a point where he's like, I don't know, something's wrong here. I'm actually not enjoying these fancy dinners anymore. And he kind of went off, and I think he's either West Virginia or Tennessee, I can't remember which, but like off in the woods. William Gibson is another, people know, science fiction writer who brought us a lot of the kind of imaginary that we now have about what essentially the internet is. Introduced the term cyberspace, everyone knows this. And this is one of those other kinds of participations that shape and inform the way in which we think about the world. So when I was in Seattle, around the time when Avi and I first met, I was working at the Human Interface Technology Lab, which is doing virtual reality. I'm still in this kind of very confused adult state, like, who am I, what am I doing? I know, I'll go back to school and figure it out. Didn't work. And when I entered into the Human Interface Technology Lab, I met this one guy. His name was Random. We've recently reconnected. And he's kind of a hippie guy. He floats about 2 centimeters off the ground, I swear to God. And he sort of looked at me. When I asked him, it's like, where's the lab manual? And he sort of looked at me and said, like, go get a copy of Neuromancer. And just kind of nodded his head in that kind of way that hippies would do. And just kind of pivoted without actually moving his feet and glided off. And I went down there and I read Neuromancer. And I was like, you know what, you're right. This is amazing. I don't know what's going on here. It didn't make sense to me, but it made sense in this beautiful way. It was like the imagination of William Gibson was infusing itself and circulating amongst the conversations that were happening amongst the people in the lab. Quite literally. We referred to it as the Cyberspace deck. That rig that we had, it was the 2 silicon graphics workstations. I forget what they were, ES450, something like that. And the whole thing was a Cyberspace deck. And that's the way in which we made sense of the technology we were building, thanks to this guy. And I find that profound, right? So this guy is as much a shaper of the future as anyone with the big checkbooks who says, hey, go do this thing. Neil Stephenson. So Avi will remember this. He used to hang out when we were at World Design. So my first startup that was doing work to build virtual worlds. It's called World Design. And Neil would come by, he came over from Ballard, and he could come around and hang out. And he's like listening, and we're having conversations. Like, oh my God, this is an interesting guy, very profound, active thinker, sort of like wonderfully on the spectrum, as we'd say, self-admittedly, and he engages in all these sort of fascinating tests. I mean, in fact, I guess you'd have to be on the spectrum to write like an 800-word novel. I mean, how do you even do that? Or the latest one where there's like, I don't know, 300 words just describing the technology. And also someone who circulates amongst the Silicon Valley decision makers and movers and shakers. So another interesting way in which the worlds of fiction are shaping and informing the worlds of design and technology. We might even think about Ayn Rand and the way in which a political philosophy in the form of a novel is embraced by the libertarians in various parts of the world. Elon Musk, I mean, what can you say? Another, it has this particular role. It's like not writing science fiction, but doing it, enacting it, even in the tweets, even in the ideas and the things that is being circulated. We could look at them incredulously, but how we could also look at it as a form of creating a world through narrative prose. So this is what I do. So design fiction, a consideration of creating worlds, of actually creating possible worlds, but in a form where we actually make the objects from these worlds. And I think that there's something really integral to the kind of work that is going on amongst communities like yours and others, that rather than wondering and sort of describing and talking about these worlds, we find the way to tap into our imagination and materialize artifacts from these worlds, as if we've gone there and brought something back, and treat it as if it's something that you don't know, you only have partial knowledge of it. Archaeologist, forensic detective, right? Imagine that job of having to go into a scene and just look at all the evidence around and try to reconstruct what happened. Think about the work that you do, and when you think about going to these worlds and imagining into the possibility of these worlds, think about it as finding those objects from there. And forget about trying to come up with a solution or the final answer or the absolutely very, kind of self-satisfying prediction. Just bring back fragments from those worlds and put them on a desk and ask someone about them. What do you think about this? And start having conversations that build into these worlds. And this is something a practice that I've really embraced quite a bit. I started a company in 2008, and sorry, was it 2008? I can't remember anymore. 2014, and when things got really, really hard at the company, I kind of retreated into that 5, 6, 7-year-old self, and that was so I was a mess, basically, put it that way. And out of that, what I started doing, when people ask me, it's like, well, what's the future of the company? Like investors asking you that. And I've been sharing with them this like kind of, basic typical 11-page PowerPoint pitch deck, all done up to the cadence and the sort of chapters that people expected. And I just stopped doing that. And I said, you know what, fuck that. I'm going to go into the future of this company as I imagine it. And I ended up spending a good bit of the pandemic, which was amazing for a well-adjusted social introvert like me, the majority of the pandemic, actually writing the annual report for the company from the future. And it felt like a natural impulse to me. That rather than writing the annual report of the company looking backwards, I'm going to go into the future of the company and write the annual report from where I would want it to be. So at the time, that was the annual report from 2024. And in that, I exhibited all those artifacts from that world. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew what I wanted to create. And so I went bonkers. So it's like full-on product renders of these things that I imagined. And it was all like, kind of tangible, real, to the point where people kind of like, oh, actually I fooled a couple companies. Some companies were like, oh my God, this is great. When did you get this? Who would get that edition? I got in trouble with some companies because I did editions that were a collaboration with them. And they were, well, can you take that off of Instagram? We're not quite doing that. And there was playing in that middle space. And I think that element, that thing that you just did now, that little bit of a chuckle, is important. It provides that point of entry for people to wander into the world. It's not antagonization. It's like almost being playful with people. Could you imagine a world where there was this thing? And so that's what we've ended up doing. Oh, so by the way, I sold the company. So they saw it and they were like, this is great. This is all we've been asking for. And I think there's a lesson in there. I mean, for me certainly, but I think for all of us, to think about what we do when we talk about the future and where we go when we talk about the future. Are we here going there? Or do we actually take our imagination into that place in a really thorough way, like not giving up on the hard things that we're not sure how to answer, or the questions that are left unanswered. Those questions can just they can live as questions. They can live as, you know, to take the forensic detective example, as that blood splatter. I don't know what that is. Any ideas? They can live as all those little remnants that are left over from a scene that, like the archaeologists, you dug and I don't know what these things are, but they were here. And if they were here, it meant someone was here. It meant that they lived, they had ideas, they had thoughts, they engaged in work. And so what do we do with that? So, are we cool? Okay. So just to conclude, I do want to give like a fairly significant plug to the work going on at the Near Future Laboratory, because I think everything that we're doing is incredibly important for these kinds of actions. And our motto is, we make products from your future. We make products from your futures. And the idea there is that we literally go to these worlds. I've got a time machine. And we go to these places, and through this act, but essentially a mindset reset, we imagine what we might see there. And then, but rather than trying to answer the question, we make an artifact from that future. So there's a group working on a magazine from the future for the future of fashion. There's another group doing a magazine from the future that might be like American Cinematographer, you know, like the film magazine, to understand what the future of entertainment might be. And we don't know the answers, but we know ways to get there, to represent those worlds. An advertisement for a company that makes some kind of device. An advertisement for a company that is called Base Model, that has all the base models for famous actors. And you start living into these worlds in a way that isn't trying to just tell you what the world is, but trying to show you the evidence of the world, the implications, the symptoms of that world, as if we're living in it. So we wrote a book, The Manual of Design Fiction. Very humbling that it sold out in 2 weeks. So literally, the second printing is literally at the warehouse now. So any day now it'll be available. And then the follow-on book I wrote builds on these ideas that were in this book, which is called "It's Time to Imagine Harder." And that's my kind of motto now. It's time to imagine harder. We need to think more thoroughly, more deeply into the futures that we're going to occupy. And we need to remind ourselves that we do have the ability to imagine. It's something that I think we forget, maybe at that first moment when we're kind of shamed as a kid, where someone says like, that doesn't look like a dog, and you're kind of like, well, that's it, I'm done. I'm done. Be easier to be an accountant, or whatever. Not to diminish the value of accountants. I love my accountant. Scott the accountant's my accountant. And then there are other things. So this was a catalog of products from the future called TBD Catalog. So it's just like, it's filled with stuff. Tons of different products, and the idea there is not to come up with the next great product idea. The idea there is to imagine into possibility on all sides of it, every angle, both the worlds that you want to inhabit, as well as the worlds that you want to avoid. And these all stand in as reminders, but they stand in a different way from just telling a story about it. They stand in a different way from just writing a novel. And that's because people receive it in a way where they're kind of like, look at it, it's like, what the fuck is this? This is crazy. And they enter into it with an open mind. And their imagination is all of a sudden activated. And that feeling of kind of wonder is activated. This is another book. I don't know if they're PK Dick fans. It's kind of hard to see. One of the first editions of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep sort of had this cover. This is tweaked, so this is design fiction. And this is called Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, an analysis of the artificial psyche. And this came from a world where we live amongst androids, which is kind of like right now, and a way of representing what that world might look like in the form of an artifact. Now this is fun. It's playful. It's not the book that a PhD is expected to write. It is something that is meant to make people do what all of you are doing now, which is kind of smile and wonder. It's meant to make you think about the ways in which we go into futures. Do we go into futures just with predictions? Do we go into futures just with whatever someone might say in a spreadsheet? Or do we go into futures with our imagination and with our sense of curiosity and creativity, and remind ourselves, even as neuroscientists, right, who deal with lots of graphs and tables and different kinds of statistical analysis, we should be making these. These should go alongside of the kind of very serious, very austere, very structured work that we do in order to keep our positions, in order to level up in our roles at companies. We should be creating these with as much dedication, devotion, and commitment as we do the so-called proper science. This is meaning making as much as a table or graph is. This is meaning making as much as the device that you might build, or as much as the seriousness that comes with having a board of directors or having investors. Design fiction. Thank you.
One, just honored to meet you in person, man. Been a fan for years. Got the book, read
Thank
it,
you.
genius. So thank you. You talked about design think, futures thinking and the sense of provocation towards wonder, so to speak. And one of the things that I found in diving into strategic foresight, speculative design, creating a design futures team at my previous workplace, there's an affect to doing this work that I feel like in some ways is not acknowledged enough by some of the frameworks. I've seen people respond to future artifacts and so forth. People have had trauma histories, and you can see the visceral reaction. So I would just love to hear, like, how do we move forward, not just in terms of futures thinking, but a futures fluency to feel into the future as well.
Yeah. That's a really good question and point. Well, I think there's the way in which I can imagine doing that is to find the way which collectively, so all of us, not just futurists or not just people who consider their domain to be about the future. We all have a stake in the future, right? Because we're all going to have to inhabit it. We're all going to have to live in it. And I think finding the way to draw us together around that. And I think in really pragmatic terms. So the reason why I do all this is because I want people to say it over and over again. I want people to say, it's time to imagine harder. Like, I'm done. Like, we're going to do this kind of work. And I think as it moves up the stack in terms of like decision makers and these kinds of things, it becomes just hygiene. Hey, I don't know. Hey, did you imagine harder on that? Could you imagine harder? Try it again. And you find the way in which that vernacular introduces itself. I think it's just like I don't think it's any more complicated than that. Ideally, I'd love to see a world. We were talking about it earlier in our group, where like you have fifth period imagination with Mr. Mackey. Like that is actually part of your schooling, your education. You have I don't know, 20 minutes in the afternoon to daydream. Everyone daydream. Stop looking at the board. Look out there. What's going on over there? And I feel like it was like, maybe I'm looking nostalgically back to my education. So I grew up a product of the Princeton regional school system. And it was just a wonderful experience to have teachers like Mr. Mackey, who was the art teacher, who was loved by everyone, who encouraged imagination. So I want like fifth period imagination. I want, when I'm in 11th grade, I want to be able to take AP imagination. And I want to get a bachelor's and master's degree in imagination. And finding the way to kind of normalize that mode of thinking, that mindset, that approach. And not doing it in a way where it's like, oh, you're going to be an artist or something like that. It's like, no, I'm going to be a neuroscientist. Fuck that. And where the imagination is expected to be there. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but it operates in a different mode. And I think it's just from hearing from people here, most of us would admit that we have an active imagination. Very high performing, very, very thoughtful, considered people. But then we're expected to operate in this other particular mode, which is, because I was kind of like an asshole in education. It's like, I'm not going to publish something to the ACM. I don't like their format. I don't like that I overheard Avi talk that I have to pay to go to the conference when I'm providing the content. Like, I don't get that. So finding the ways in which we change the structures around which ideas circulate and even the ways in which value is exchanged in those kind of idea circulation networks. And then I think we're going to solve a lot of big problems. I think when you have imagination and collaboration in this really beautiful, robust intersection where they're actually working together and not working against each other, where structure isn't saying like, hey, chill out, stop doing that weird stuff that you're doing. We gotta report to write. You say like, I'm writing it. It just happens to be this thing that I'm making. They're gonna feel into this. It's just not gonna be, 2-column ACM format, but it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be amazing. So seeing, who was it who showed the lotus? Like, I was just like, yes, that. That's the world that we need to feel into, because we're tangible beings. Like, you guys are neuroscientists, you know, it's like you see a thing and it does something to you. I don't know what it does because I'm not a neuroscientist, but it does something.
Imagination is very interesting for multiple reasons, especially in terms of the degree of ambivalence that can exist within the use of the term. But when you're tying it into science fiction and writing and sort of these worlds that are speculatively imagined, there's also this sense of utopia versus dystopia, right? And trying to imagine oneself into a future where either the problems that we face in our current reality are solved or fixed or absent, or they are sort of the future that we are in is the product of those problems sort of propagating and sort of being exacerbated. And so I'm very curious as to this very intriguing model, or sort of this notion of design fiction, where the imagination is situated on that spectrum of valence, of the positivity versus sort of the reality, or sort of the realism of the dystopias or the utopias that we could exist in, and for whom.
Yeah, totally good one. So the way I practice it, and the way I try to encourage others to practice it, is to accept the contingencies of the world at any point. You know, I don't think that there's I understand the value of utopia or dystopia as a kind of concept and model. I think it's a setup to say, well, is it going to be a utopia or a dystopia, or even starting that conversation? I think the best design fiction that I'm drawn to is that which kind of represents the world in all its beautiful splendor and flaws. So it is one of the things that when we did TBD catalog, in the production of it was like, we got to show like all the problematic aspects, because people feel into that when they see it's like, oh, this thing looks amazing, and then they read, in the product description, they'll read like the fine print. They realize like, oh yeah, okay, it sort of is what it is in a way, because it's made by the hand of humans, right? And it's going to be inherently compromised or flawed, or something not considered, or something that doesn't quite work right. Not saying that we should just kind of like shrug and be like, all right, well, let's just accept the world the way it is, and all the problems that we addressed today and we brought up today, let's just accept them and just kind of go back and watch Netflix and have to deal with these hard problems. We need to continue to push through those hard problems. But I think it just feels to me like a little bit of a it's not helpful, at least from where I'm sitting, to say, let's expect a utopia, or what was it? Frederick Jameson said it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. My question. I mean, it's not his fault, but my question is like, well, how can we imagine? Can we imagine it? What do we need? What are the tools? Tell me. Like, we've done amazing things as humans. I would argue as a result of our ability to imagine. Like that picture of Ed White floating on his back. To me, that represents that beautiful kind of collaboration in a fraught world. Right? This is a time when people are like, going to space? Really? Detroit's burning. I think we need to focus on that. There's a revolution in Paris. There's shit going on in Vietnam. Yet we were able to come together and create this kind of this remarkable thing. 500,000 people, or whatever it was, and $1 trillion, or whatever it would be in like 2023 dollars, to build one spaceship, hand built, to get a couple of dudes on the moon. Like, I mean, how do you even respond to that? And do you go to the utopian side, like, amazing, incredible human ingenuity? Or do you go to the dystopian side, what a fucking waste of money and time and resources? Imagine what else we could have done. Yeah, imagine it. Imagine it and make it happen.
And